she needs to have avenues of communication that, for practical purposes. And but I think I think as a general principle, we try to promote the idea that you use technology, you figure out what do you want to do, and then how can I use these tools to accomplish the end, rather than, and I'll confess, I started college as an electrical engineering major. I built my first computer from a kit in '83. I built my first stereo from a kit, from a kit when I was in high school. And I've always been I've always been fascinated by gadgets. And there have been times, I can remember when I had one of my first Mac computers, and they brought out HyperCard, which was the first hypertext language for, and I spent a lot of time, I thought this has really cool capacities. And I spent time trying to figure out, well, what do I have? There was no need it actually met. So I tried to find things I could do with it so that I could have a need that it met, because I just loved playing with the program. So I realized that I have in my own makeup this tendency to say, okay, here's a technology, it can do so many cool things. I don't really need or even want to do those cool things. But I can do them, so there is a kind of temptation to do them. It's very similar to what Ed Murrow discovered when he did that first broadcast. We can have screens, we can have live images from New York and San Francisco. Do we really want live images from New York and San Francisco? What need does it fulfill? Well, it serves the need of demonstrating that we can do it. And so that, I think that's a very common affliction. And so we try to encourage a kind of alertness among our kids. But we did throw out TVs. We never had, I don't think my kids ever watched broadcast TV though. Most TV we watched was videos of things, or some broadcast TV, but very, very little. And they were never allowed to turn the TV set on. I've always marveled at the fact that there's some families where people guard the use of the refrigerator more than they do the television. And it just seems to me to be misguided. So the idea that whatever they get into, the television is okay, but the fridge is off limits because they might do something harmful. Yeah, I think it was much more, and again, my kids, it's not that they're, both kids went through periods of online gaming, but there was always, I think they've always been much more deliberate. I think that word deliberate, I think that's a word I use in many contexts. We need to be more deliberate about a lot of cultural, about adopting a lot of cultural things.
Yeah, I'm hearing that there should be more intentionality, like we said earlier, what we eat and how we eat,
Yeah.
what we choose, how we use technology,
Yeah.
why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Okay, can you speak to technology impacting our loves? Augustine's, we are what we love.
Yeah, so, well, okay, yeah, so one thing, and I'm thinking about my kids' experience, I worked in media most of my life of some kind, and hence worked with media technologies. And I wrote a book when my kids were still very little about popular culture. And one thing that my wife and I talked a lot about as we thought about their absorbing cultural things is that we wanted them to love things because they were valuable, not just because they were popular. I actually have a lecture I gave. In fact, I thought of using material from that lecture in this series, where I talked about how what's really valued, what's really loved, is not the true, the good, and the beautiful, but the new, the cool, and the sensational. And technologies prejudice the new, the cool, and the sensational more than the true, the good, and the beautiful. Often, a lot of, I mean, in their natural habitat, and I should say their natural habitat is tied to commercial interests. I've talked much about that. It's not just that the technologies show up, but people are trying to figure out how can we monetize the capacities of this technology. And the new, the cool, and the sensational is a way of monetizing it. Where you're more likely to make money advancing the new, the cool, and the sensational than advancing the true, the good, and the beautiful. Would that it were not so. So I think that to the extent, and my opening discussion of spectacle. I've been talking with my host family about various movies and television programs that we've been watching. And we've been talking, my wife and I recently watched the most recent Captain America film. And that's kind of, talk about spectacle. I mean, you know, these, so many movies that are high grossing films are, the principal attraction tends to be the spectacle, not, and that's made possible by technology. It's made possible by remarkable special effects capacities. When I was in NPR, I interviewed two guys who did special effects on some werewolf. It was a cutting-edge horror film at the time, and it was cutting edge because of the how gross it was, basically. And they had achieved new levels of grossness through remarkable technical means. This is not computer animation. They were doing amazing stuff. This is early 80s. And I remember in talking with them that they were not at all interested. They weren't even interested on the gross out factor. For them, it was a technical challenge. How can we have somebody whose head looks like it falls off or whatever? It was a technical challenge. For them, it purely was an engineering problem. It could have been at MIT. So they weren't thinking either of the psychological questions, how it was affecting people. So technologies enable a love for the sensational, well, the technologies that we have encourage that. And again, I think that's coupled with advertising and commercial interest. That's the case. How is the technology sold to you? I think it'd be very interesting we have educators here from classical schools, to have kids watch commercials and ask the kids what loves are being advanced in this commercial. What does this commercial assume you ought to be loving? And in technologies, not only encourage the love of the sensational, but they are explicitly marketed with the idea that they can unleash our full potential to do and be anything we want to do and be. So they actually encourage the love of a particular notion of identity. There aren't a lot of ads for technologies that say you can be a more humble person if you buy this product. Not just for technologies, for any product. But the idea that you can be wiser, or you can resonate more with the true, the good, and the beautiful, with your, that this tool will enable you to do that. Now, I'm not saying that the tool couldn't be used to do that. This iPad helps me, I do a lot of reading on this, of articles and books that I get. So I hope that it's helping me connect with truth as well as the good and beautiful. I watched a lot of Bach cantatas on this iPad. But I don't think that the way the technologies exist in their natural habitat in American culture means that some of the technologies are actually invented for the purpose, and some of them become quickly appropriated. I mean, I haven't talked about porn yet, but I mean, just think about what I actually met years ago with a guy who worked for an anti-porn team at the FBI, and he had a lot of things to say about technology and loves. The access to pornography that was made possible through technologies was just unimaginable. I mean, the kinds of human tragedy that came in the wake of that was really, really sad. And for him, the technology, it wouldn't have happened. That was the Pandora's box that got everything. So anyway, those are a few things I'd say.
Regarding speech versus spectacle, or maybe word versus image, to use it.
Yeah.
Could you comment on the role of the arts, and then a picture paints 1,000 words, this implies a measure of superiority.
Yeah.
So, yes, image versus...
Yeah, I mean, again, my background's in film, and I think there are some things that images can convey that words can't convey. I definitely think that's the case. And I think that some of my favorite films are actually pretty low on dialogue at all. I mentioned to a group of students yesterday at the school Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life, which communicates much, much more through imagery than, although there is a voiceover narration that situates the imagery. Meaning in imagery is often elusive and often misunderstood. And I think people don't realize the extent to which it can be misunderstood. Let me give two quick examples of this. Years ago, there was a project, I think it was tied somehow to Campus Crusade for Christ. Somebody thought, what was it? Was it called the Gospel film? Was there a film where they took one of the Gospels and they made a movie of like the whole Gospel? Like in the 80s. Somebody know what that is? What's it called? Jesus film. Yeah, was it the Jesus film? Well, I think the people behind that thought, let's film the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation, which is a remarkably ambitious thing. I was wondering about the Song of Songs, but the earlier point, so they made a film they tried to make a film of the first chapter of Genesis, okay? And I was working at NPR at the time, and I was invited to a screening by this group. I was invited not because I was a Christian, but because I was a journalist. And I did some religion reporting for NPR when I was there. And there were a group of clergy, and there were other journalists, but there were also clergy, there were rabbis, and because they wanted this to be an ecumenical thing, and they showed this film, which they thought faithfully represented in images the story of creation. Well, when it was over, there were two groups that protested it strongly. The one group was people in a more, shall we say, literalist cast, who felt that the account was portrayed too metaphorically and wasn't literal enough. And then there were other people who felt that the account was too literal. And I thought it was interesting. They saw the meaning of the image in light of what they expected to see, which reminded me of back when I was in film school studying film theory. The Russian theorists were doing really the cutting-edge work in thinking about how film communicates meaning. And there's a famous experiment that was done called Kuleshov's experiment, named after the director or theorist. I can't remember who was the director. And what he did, he got one of the best stage actors in Russia at the time to come in, and he filmed just a static shot of the actor with an expression on his face. I won't say what kind of expression, but a very expressive face. And then he showed that face to different audiences, and he intercut the face with different images. So in one instance, he intercut it with shots of children playing in a swing set. And in one, he intercut it with shots of a very appetizing looking meal, as appetizing as black and white photography could be, on a table. And on the other one, I think there was three. And the other one, it was an open coffin. And all of the audiences said how wonderfully expressive this actor was in expressing entirely different things. In one case, grief. In the other case, joy of the children. In the other case, hunger and desire. So there was expressiveness there, but what the expressiveness expressed was actually, well, in this case, it was another image. It was the context of the image. So there was expressiveness, but I think that, so images, you could say that in this case, images did convey meaning. But I think we also want the caveat of realizing that the same image, depending on its context, can convey an entirely different meaning. And so there's always a built-in ambiguity to images. In my book years ago, I have a section on visual language, and I talk about the limitations. Visual language also, that most visual language, particularly in film, I was thinking, or television, is present tense indicative. And the example I used is if I showed a picture of a cat resting on a mat, and I asked people, what does this image mean? A lot of people might say, there's a cat on the mat, okay? Well, what if I wanted to convey the idea that the cat shouldn't be on the mat? The image alone, I might introduce a narrative element, having somebody chasing the cat off the mat. But the subjunctive is a little tricky to indicate purely visually. The past tense is also, again, you have to use narrative. The cat was on the mat, or the cat will be on the mat. Those are things that are trickier, and you have to introduce narrative elements. And the point I was trying to make is that there's a kind of precision available in verbal language that isn't available. Now that doesn't mean that visual language is useless, because there are all sorts of other elusive possibilities. Because a lot of communication actually doesn't demand the precision of a narrow proposition like the cat is on the mat. It actually benefits from something more elusive and suggestive and multi-layered. And that's where a film like Terry Malick's The Tree of Life, I mentioned, it just has a wonderful evocative things and convey. I think you can use visual imagery to suggest qualities more than propositions.
Yes, what's popping in my mind is back in my Eastern Europe stories, I remember as a young man, there's a Czech film. You couldn't say what you needed to say about what was happening.
Yeah.
I think this is in 1968. So I think the image was
a
flower and then a fist.
Yeah.
And everybody who watched that knew exactly what
Yeah. So metaphoric, I mean, obviously images can convey metaphoric meaning, and metaphoric meaning is remarkably important. So I don't want to, but I do think it still is interesting that the prohibition on images and the warning in John, 1 John, of the lust of the eyes, and there is a kind of priority given to hearing as a sense, and to the word, the spoken word. There is a kind of priority, but I don't think it's an exclusive commitment. Or again, I think imagery. I mean, you also have the imagery that's suggested through parables, and I mean, parables are an instance where words are used to convey an image.
I think we have time for one more. What do you think of the Benedictine option? If you give a brief description of that, and then what are your thoughts?
Yeah. And I think Rod Dreher, actually, I think he wants to call it the Benedict option. Benedictine option maybe involved drinking. I think he calls it, we'll talk about that. Quickly, Rod Dreher, who used to be he's a journalist. He is a popular blogger at the American Conservative right now. He was at the Dallas Morning, when I met him, he was at the Dallas Morning News. He was the op-ed editor. He was the editor of the editorial page there. but he's worked for numerous magazines and newspapers, and now online. Eastern Orthodox, former Roman Catholic, former Protestant. And he's very committed about the moral decadence of our society, and committed about how, concerned about how Christians convey their convictions to their children. And how we are confirmed, how are we confirmed in our convictions? What reinforces our commitments? And he has picked up an image from Alistair McIntyre, who's a moral philosopher who spent quite a bit of time at Notre Dame, who wrote a book back in the 80s called After Virtue, in which McIntyre talks about the cultivation of virtues and how virtues are real virtues have to be cultivated within communities with shared practices, that our hearts are shaped. It's very similar to the work that James K. Smith has done, and it's really an ancient insight that Aristotle understood and C.S. Lewis understood. That our hearts are shaped by shared communal practices that involve embodied actions and ritual. And what Rod has been inciting a conversation about for a long time is that Christians in particular need to be really deliberate about their membership in communities that are striving to have practices that are in keeping with our convictions. I mean, he really is talking about sustaining a Christian culture at a local level and being very deliberate about it, and that the way we're going to survive. The reason Alistair McIntyre, I mentioned him, at the very end, on the very last page, McIntyre says that our culture, he says it's dangerous to compare one era to another, but I'll do it anyway, that our cultural moment is not unlike the moment when the Roman Empire was crumbling. And he basically says that civilization and the tradition of the virtues and the commitment to the truth, the true, the good, and the beautiful, was sustained by what he refers to as new forms of moral community. He said there were some people, as the Roman Empire was crumbling, who tried to figure out how can we hold this thing together. And there were others who realized that we can't piece it back together. Its best by date is over. That's not what he said. I'm using a metaphor. And he says new forms of moral community had to arise in order to sustain this moral tradition. And what he has in mind are the rise of the monasteries, which sustained that tradition in remarkable ways. And he says perhaps now we're not waiting for Godot, but for a new and very different Benedict. In other words, Benedict being the founder of, well, not the founder, but he's a seminal figure in the formation of monastic life. And what McIntyre is saying, we need somebody who's going to help us figure out what are the forms of moral community we need as we're entering a new dark age. McIntyre also says, remarkably, one of the differences between their time and ours is the barbarian are not now at the gates. They have been ruling us for some time. So how do we achieve? And so Rod is very fascinated by this challenge that McIntyre has put down in the early 80s. And he's asking, given the condition we're in, what do we do? So I've summarized now. What do I think about it? His book comes out next month, it comes out this month, I think. And he and I talked quite a bit about this. I'll say I'm entirely sympathetic to his desire for formative community life. And if I have one hesitation about it, or about the way it's being perceived, and people have been criticizing him since he first started talking about it without knowing what he's concluding, and we're not going to know, so I want to be very careful. The one thing I would want to reinforce, let me be very positive, one thing I would want to emphasize is that I want to think about this as Christians. I think we need to think about this as the church, as the church is destined to be the form of the new humanity, of true human community. And that I don't want this to just be an exercise in sociological study of how do moral convictions get conveyed from one generation to another. That's a useful thing. I want to take it a step further and say, for Christians, we're not just learning lessons from Orthodox Jews or Muslims or who've also had minority moral cultures. We need to think about this in terms of the church as the advent of a new humanity. And so I want to think about it eschatologically and ecclesiologically as well. That may be in Rod's picture, I'm not sure.
I wish we could go